Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC Vegas 105. That's right, we're back at the Apex this weekend, but we've got a real fun headliner in my opinion with Josh Emmett versus Lerone Murphy, who Murphy's surging through the division at the minute. It could be the next big thing to come out of the UK, potential title implications maybe with a big win here, but of course he's got to stay out of the way of that big right hand from Emmett, who is the hardest hitter in the entire division. So definitely a fight that I'm intrigued by. I'm looking forward to breaking it down as well. But just before we get into those breakdowns, as always, if you're wanting to jump into the action this weekend, then make sure you do so at MMA Play 365. We've got something for every type of gambler, whether you're a long-term gambler that makes your own final decisions, but you like the written breakdowns to find out where we're at in regards to the handicapper, which is myself, whether you're somebody that likes the fun parlays, maybe you want to build your own parlay, maybe you want pre-built parlays, well, we've got that section for you as well. Then the last part of the handicapper side, we've got the official bets, which is the official bets from the professional handicapper, which again is myself and where my money is going if you just want to tail what I am betting. And then of course, with every single betting subscription, you will get Bayes AI included, which is our UFC prediction software. And Bayes AI provides a percentage prediction for every possible outcome of every UFC event, every UFC fight, every single week, and all our subscriptions are super affordable as well. Our ethos is we want you to make the money back from your subscription as quickly as you possibly can, so then you can start profiting on top of your bets. That's all at MMAplay365.com. And now with the promotion out the way, with the introduction out the way, let's get breaking down some fights. And of course, as always, we start in the main event. 5 rounds in the featherweight division, Josh Emmett versus Lerone Murphy. And I really like this fight. Look, from Josh Emmett's perspective, I try not to have favourite fighters in the UFC, but when you've got fighters that are exciting, that hit brutal knockouts, fighters that also win and cash bets for you, and also cash a lot as the underdog when pretty much the entire world is on the opposite side, it's hard not to love those types of fighters, and that's exactly what I have with Josh Emmett. Josh Emmett's a fighter that I've cashed on multiple times when everybody's on the other side. You know, he's an underdog and people aren't really giving him the sort of a good chance of winning the fight, and Emmett comes out and he either puts on a clinic or he hits a big KO. Like I said in the introduction to this podcast, in my opinion, Josh Emmett is still the hardest hitter in the entire division. He just doesn't hit like your average featherweight. He's got so much power and he's flatlined so many fighters inside the cage in regards to, brutal knockouts, one-punch knockouts, not needing follow-up punches. And like I say, it's hard for me not to like Josh Emmett because he's not only entertaining with the big knockouts, but he's cashed so many bets for me in the past. And more often than not, they're underdogs as well, with him being consistently overlooked, underrated. So yeah, Josh Emmett's definitely a fighter that I like a lot. The thing is with Emmett, he is getting up there in age now. He has been in wars. He's suffered a couple of bad knockouts himself. It's one of them where I'm a little bit torn here. Not because I like Josh Emmett. I'm being real. Look, Lerone Murphy, again, as I said in the introduction, is a fighter that's surging up in the division right now. He's improving from fight to fight. He's showing the holes that he's had in previous fights are getting fixed as well as part of his development. And when you hit over 200 strikes against Edson Barbosa, and I know this is an aging Edson Barbosa, but I actually bet Barbosa against Lerone Murphy, and the reason why I bet it, not just because it was a plus money underdog shot, but because Edson Barbosa is still a fighter that's got a lot to give, and is a fighter that will shut out prospects that are trying to surge up the division. And I thought that Lerone Murphy was going to be one of them prospects that got shut out. But man, it was an absolute clinic from Lerone Murphy, and a super high volume clinic as well. So along with all that, Lerone Murphy is super athletic. I wouldn't say he's got natural one punch stopping power, but he's got a good striking game, varies his attack as well with the kicks, mixing kicks within punch combinations, and then he can wrestle and grapple as well. So yeah, like I say, it's a real tough one, this fight, because like I say, Emmett is closer to the end of his career than he is to his prime, and Lerone Murphy is a fighter that's surging. So from the betting perspective, I kind of feel like they've got the betting line like really right here, because Lerone Murphy's around -300, -330 as I'm recording this podcast. And I think that, look, if you're throwing him into a fun parlay, that's fine, I get it. But from the long-term perspective, finding value and betting value and trying to beat the bookies long-term, I don't think that -300, -330 holds too much value. I think it's probably right where it is. And on the flip side, Josh Emmett's -240, -250 in some spots. And I just don't know whether that's high enough to take that shot on Emmett. Because look, if you don't watch this fight, if you wake up on Sunday and you look at the results and the result says Josh Emmett wins by KO, nobody should be surprised. I certainly won't be surprised, because Emmett's done it to that many fights. He's got that much power. And like I say, you look, even though Emmett's aging, you look at like the last 6 years, he's only lost twice in 6 years. That was to, Ilia Topuria, who, by the way, that was like, I'm not going to say it was like a good fight for Emmett, but Emmett like put up a really good fight, better than a lot of the recent opponents that Topuria's been fighting. Yes, Emmett got butchered, the longer the fight went on, but not many people last 5 rounds with Ilia Topuria, but Josh Emmett did, and Emmett was firing back as well. And even when he was getting butchered, he was just biting down on the mouthpiece and thinking, fuck it, I'm going to throw everything I've got at this dude because he's butchering me. And like I say, it was quite, even though he got butchered and he did lose comfortably, it was quite impressive. At the time, we thought, okay, well, yeah, Topuria's leveled up. But looking at what Topuria's done since Josh Emmett, you go back to that Emmett fight and you think, actually, that's quite impressive with how he performed. And then the other fight that Emmett's lost in those last 6 years as well was Yair Rodriguez. He was doing quite well in round 1, and then he got finished in round 2. So it wasn't, that was a little bit underwhelming from Josh Emmett. But Yair Rodriguez is still like a fighter at the top of the division. He's still a world-class fighter with world-class qualities. So again, I come back to this fight with Emmett and Murphy. From a striking perspective, it's going to be Murphy that's looking to put the volume on Emmett. But the thing is with Murphy, you make one mistake and Emmett's going to land that big right hand. And I just think that if he hits any fighter in this division clean with that right hand, I think 9 times out of 10 they get knocked out, or it's the beginning of the end. It's just, does Murphy get hit with that right hand? Because if he doesn't, then I think Murphy's fine in this fight. Like, Emmett's got a wrestling background, he can grapple himself, but I kind of think even though Murphy can wrestle and grapple, I think Emmett's the better straight wrestler, but I think both their defensive grappling is more than good enough for either fighter to not get stuck on the mat. So I do think that we might see a couple of takedowns from either side as well, successful completed takedowns, but I just don't think we see much top control time from either fighter, which then puts the fight back on the feet, and it then makes a fight and becomes a fight that's won and lost on the feet striking. And then we come back to the volume versus the power. And yeah, I just think that, look, it's not just the volume from Murphy, it's the youthfulness, it's the speed, it's the movement, it's the athleticism. I think that's all going to be on the side of Murphy. It's just, does he get hit with that big shot? But again, when you come to predicting fights and analysing fights, I have to stay true to what I always say, and that's, I will always side with the fighter who has to just mind out of the way of that one big bomb, rather than picking the fighter that lands that one big bomb, unless it's like a Francis Ngannou that you just know is gonna, he's gonna land a punch because it's a fist fight, and they're that big and powerful. I just think Lerone Murphy can mind his P's and Q's here, and I think as long as Emmett doesn't land that big bomb, Murphy should be able to win the fight and look good doing so. A little bit similar to what Topuria did, just land some good volume, hit the scar tissue of Emmett, cause cuts, get the blood flowing. It's just like I say, for Josh Emmett, he can win this fight. It's just it's a small window of opportunity. And I don't like to call it a puncher's chance, but essentially if this goes 5 rounds, and if this goes to a decision, I just don't see Josh Emmett, unless he's dropped Murphy in every single round, or shall we say 3 out of the 5 rounds. But the thing is, I don't think Emmett will drop Murphy multiple times and the fight go on, if that makes sense. I think if Emmett's dropping Murphy, he's going to end up knocking him out, which again, you go back to the puncher's chance. It's tough. Like I say, I think from a betting perspective, if you're playing the long-term game with value, it is pretty much a dog or pass situation. I think that the plus money on Emmett is more tempting to me than the -300, -330 of Murphy. But I just think we're going to see Murphy get his hand raised at the end of the night. So for those reasons, I'm picking Lerone Murphy to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Joanderson Brito versus Pat Sabatini. Now, I wouldn't actually have minded this fight being one of these featured co-main events that are 5 rounds. It is only 3 rounds. And some people might argue, and I'll make that argument for Brito's side as well, that the fight might actually not go 5 rounds if it was scheduled for 5. It might not even go 3 rounds. But here, I think, look, from a betting perspective, I think the line's too wide. You know, I understand Brito being the favourite, but Pat Sabatini's got a legitimate path to victory here, and I think a lot of people are just going to look past that and just see, oh, well, Brito's this explosive beast on the feet with the striking, and Sabatini's been caught before, and Brito is that type of fighter who'll catch him again. And I completely agree with that side if you're arguing the Brito side, because, you know, you look at Sabatini, he got caught by Diego Lopez, he got caught by Damon Jackson as well, and both of those two are actually predominantly grapplers as well. So now you've got a predominant striker in Brito, who's probably arguably maybe more explosive than both of those fighters. You're thinking, well, okay, this is the exact type of fighter stylistically that Sabatini suffered losses against previously in the UFC, except Brito's probably better within that style than the two fighters that have done Sabatini with that style, if that makes sense. So I do understand the Brito side, but the thing is with Sabatini, there is 2 sides to every fight, and Sabatini's wrestling and his grappling is elite. It's legit. Like, these guys from Renzo Gracie in Philly under Daniel Gracie, I beat this drum all the time. You know, when I spoke about Rodolfo Vieira and Andrei Petroski, like, every man and his dog was on the side of Vieira, because Vieira's the one with the, you know, the high-level grappling accolades, you know, probably the most decorated grappler in MMA, or at least in the UFC. Rodolfo Vieira was, and like, Petroski had no chance if that fight hit the mat. Well, Vieira did get Petroski down a couple of times briefly where he could have taken the back, but I'm telling you, I beat this drum with Petroski. I actually cashed Petroski as well at like plus 225, you know, a decent size underdog in that fight. And I know it was close, but the plus 200 side was the right side. But the reason why is because I know that these black belts under Daniel Gracie are legit. They're not black belts that have been rushed through the system. And you've got other guys like this as well. Like Sean Brady's another one. I cashed Sean Brady at minus 150 against Leon Edwards because I knew if the fight hit the mat, these guys are just absolutely elite and they're legit black belts within MMA. But what I like about these Renzo Gracie Philly guys is they're not only like legit BJJ black belts and great with the grappling within MMA, but they've also all got wrestling backgrounds as well. So you've got fighters with a wrestling background and an absolutely insane top game when it comes to the jiu-jitsu. I find it hard not to like these guys. And then if you want to play a little bit of MMA maths here, which, you know, we can do that tongue-in-cheek, it's never good to, you know, impose your entire analysis on MMA math because it just don't work like that. But look at what happened when Brito fought Jonathan Pierce. Jonathan Pierce, I had bet Jonathan Pierce there. You know, I lost the bet. I was quite disappointed, actually, because Pierce, you know, took Brito down, was dominating on top on that first round. You know, Brito seemed to have no answers for that wrestling and the topside grappling of Jonathan Pierce. And then in the second round, again, Pierce did the same thing, but then Brito reversed and then got a hold of Pierce's neck and won by guillotine. But then look at what Pat Sabatini did to Jonathan Pearce when they fought. Sabatini, again, I cashed Sabatini as an underdog there as well, by the way, when every man and his dog was on the Jonathan Pearce side. But Pat Sabatini ran through Pearce. And even me that bet Sabatini didn't expect that. All I was thinking is just don't get clipped early. Don't get clipped early. Take the fight late. Start to get your wrestling going. But Sabatini just buzzsawed through Jonathan Pearce. And Pearce was a fighter that Brito had no answers against in regards to that wrestling and grappling, at least initially. But then Sabatini did the same thing to Pearce, where Pearce didn't have an answer for that wrestling and grappling. So, look, it's one of these fights where, in my opinion, it's going to go, I know it's a bit of a cliche, but it's going to go one of two ways. Like, you're either going to see Brito come out here, be explosive, land on Sabatini, and the fight will be over once that happens, because Sabatini, like I say, he has suffered losses against explosive fighters within the striking. But again, if Sabatini doesn't get, sucked into a brawl, or, he doesn't allow himself defensively to be open to these explosions from Brito, I'm telling you now, Sabatini, if he gets his wrestling and grappling going, it's better than Brito's. And I think that he'll do a good job there as well. So for me, I kind of feel that although I can accept Brito being the favourite in this fight, just because, again, historically, stylistically, Sabatini has struggled against explosive strikers with power, which is what Brito is. So I can accept that Brito's, a slight favourite in this fight, but I think the line's too wide. And look, in these types of fights where I think it's, and I say this on this podcast every single week, in fights where I think that the fight is going to be much closer than the betting line suggests, more often than not, from a straight pick and prediction perspective, I will be siding with the underdog, and I'm going to be doing the same here. For those reasons, I'm picking Pat Sabatini to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Cortavious Romious versus Chang Ho Lee. And this is, I don't know how I feel about this fight, and this is just me being honest. And the reason being, it's more on the Cortavious Romious side. I still don't know where I sit with Romious, if I'm being honest. Like in his last fight, he was a favourite against Gaston Bolaños. I cashed Gaston Bolaños, I think it was around plus 175. And I thought Bolaños looked great against Romious. And again, this is me being honest. Even me betting the underdog side there, I thought it would be much... Again, I'm not saying it was like a whitewash, but I genuinely thought there would be some moments in that fight where I'm thinking, okay, yeah, my underdog probably isn't looking that great, but then that's probably why they were an underdog. But like Bolaños looked way better than what I thought he was going to. I played the value game. I saw value in plus 175 in that specific fight, and Bolaños looked like he probably should have been a slight favourite, which I didn't expect. And again, like, Romious is an exciting fighter. He's got explosive striking, not too much regard for his defense, which is one of the reasons why I think a lot of people have got this sort of hesitancy and pause with him. And he's got a good wrestling game. He's clearly got a good grappling game as well. Like, he's a good fighter, explosive, athletic. You can see why the UFC love him. And from an entertainment perspective, fans will absolutely love Romious, because he'll bite down on his mouthpiece, throw caution to the air and throw bungalows at his opponent. So, yeah, Romious is exciting, but again, the pause and the hesitancy I have with him is decision making, fight IQ, and the lack of defense for the reasons that I've just mentioned above. There's a lot to say. There's a lot that can be said about a fighter that's got a ton of quality that makes bad decisions inside the cage at this level. And I just really hope that at some point these issues get ironed out with Romious, and it starts within the gym with the coaching and getting the right habits in, and just listening to your corner, because I'm sure his corner team aren't shouting, right, hands down, go forward and try and knock him out, swing until someone drops. Pretty confident the corner isn't saying that. So the other thing is, it's not like Romious is 23, 24 years old. Like, he's not a young, hungry prospect coming through. He's a here and now type of fighter. So I am hoping that, the negative issues that at least I'm seeing do get ironed out. But then Chang Ho Lee on the other side, he's a fighter that can be aggressive. He can come forward and look to land hard. But you look at his UFC debut against Zhao Long, and the fight was just, Chang Ho Lee was just kept on closing up in the clinch and just landing short knees. He landed a lot of volume in that fight, but the majority of them were like knees to the body inside the clinch, and it's a bit like, I just really don't know how this fight's gonna go. Like I say, look, Chang Ho Lee, what's surprising here to me at least anyway, is Chang Ho Lee is a favourite. You can get him around minus 175, whereas Romious, I think the best line you can get on him is like plus 150, but the majority is like plus 130, plus 140. I actually expected Romious to be the favourite in this fight just because people do like him, but maybe the betting market is now understanding that against, someone that is aggressive and powerful, that Romious can be got at. I do think this is Romious' fight where he gets the win though, because he's had a lot of ups and downs in regards to the Contender Series, being on there numerous times, and then the UFC where his debut where he's a favourite and he started looking really good but then faded, and yeah, he's had an up and down start under the UFC banner, and I kind of feel this is the one where he gets his UFC win. But again, it's a tentative pick because there's issues that I see with Romious that cause that pause and that hesitancy to the point where, do you want to part with your money on that? But again, he's an underdog, so you can make the argument that you can negate the issues and the things that you're not kind of happy with because you're getting a good number on him on the betting line. And then from Chang Ho Lee's side, like, I wouldn't be shocked if he won this fight, but I just don't think he's going to be able to do it in the way that, his first fight went in the UFC. It was close split decision, clinching up, landing those short knees. I just don't think that's going to cut it against Romious. Romious is too much of, is too much dynamite inside the cage in regards to, explosivity and movement and just wanting to be busy. So, yeah, it's a real tough fight to predict, in my opinion. And as I always say, I've said it once already on this podcast. I'm sure I'll say it a few more times, and I say it every week. When you get fights like this that you're either unsure of, or you think they're going to be super close, or the fight's going to be closer than the betting line suggests, even if you're picking the favourite to win, I'm going to side with the underdog in those situations. I'm doing the same here. Again, I'm picking Cortavious, Romious to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Kennedy Nzechukwu versus Martin Buday. Now, Nzechukwu is continuing this, surge in the heavyweight division. Admittedly, the level of opponent that he's fought in the UFC at heavyweight hasn't been, the highest. I'm not saying anything negative. Like, he's beating fighters that are UFC fighters. Of course, they've got quality, but from a UFC caliber perspective, not the greatest. And Martin Buday, I think he might fall into that category as well. However, he is definitely the best out of the fighters that Nzechukwu has fought so far, which is exactly what you need for Kennedy Nzechukwu. He's coming to the UFC heavyweight division, probably wants to feel a couple of fights out. UFC maybe trying to build him in the UFC as well. And they've done it in the right way, and he's getting a slight step up in competition each time he fights. And this is the next step up in competition, Martin Buday. And if he beats Martin Buday here, it's going to be another step up in competition, maybe like a Waldo Cortez Acosta next after Martin Buday. Maybe that would be a good test for Nzechukwu, but again, he's got to get past Buday here. And I think he does, if I'm being honest. Like, I think Buday is the type of fighter that can make any fight close. Like, I do think the line is probably a little bit too wide, but with that being said, I do think that the line is close to being accurate. I think Nzechukwu looks huge at heavyweight. He's really filled into his frame. I think he's only going to be getting bigger the older he gets as well, because he's still quite young. So I think Nzechukwu is going to continue to grow into this heavyweight frame. And at some point in the next 2 to 3 years, I actually think Nzechukwu could potentially be a real problem for ranked opponents in this division. But right now, he's got Martin Buday. And like I say, Buday will bite down on the mouthpiece. He'll come forwards. He'll try and land. He'll then clinch up, and he'll look to, slow a fight down when he needs to, the grinding clinch type of game. But the thing is with Nzechukwu, what Buday has got to be careful of is if Buday is clinching up here, Nzechukwu's got the long limbs, the knees up the middle, the elbows over the top. And I think that he's going to be able to crack Buday in the clinch to the point where Buday will separate. Then I think Nzechukwu's going to be good at range. The one range where I think Buday needs to be at to win this fight, if he is going to win, is the boxing range. But the issue there is Nzechukwu can still land at boxing range, but Nzechukwu could decide to either back out a little bit back to long range, or close the distance even further from boxing range and get into the clinch. So this is where I think Buday is going to struggle, because I just don't think he's going to have the luxury of staying in that close boxing range and solely that boxing range for long enough in this fight to be able to really start to get at Nzechukwu. I think Nzechukwu can control the range management and the distance a little bit better, and he's better at multiple ranges as well. So for those reasons, I am picking Kennedy Nzechukwu to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a fight between two savvy veterans. We've got Gerald Meerschaert versus Brad Tavares. And Brad Tavares, I think, finally is getting like a step down in competition. He's been fighting some of the best fighters in the UFC, fighters that have gone on to be champions as well. So I think he's finally got that step down in competition where he's fighting now somebody at his level. And Brad Tavares is like a minus 225, minus 250 favourite. I kind of get it here, because on the flip side, look, Gerald Meerschaert is a fighter that will consistently take advantage of opponents that don't have his level of experience at this level in the UFC. So fighters that are on the rise, that maybe had 3 or 4 fights in the UFC, you come against Gerald Meerschaert, they'll start to look great. Meerschaert will weather a storm, and then suddenly you're on your back, or he's landing body kicks and taking your gas tank from you. And, Meerschaert's had so many fights where the fact that he's an experienced veteran at a high level for so many years has shown through and has been the decisive reason to why he's won that fight against a lesser experienced fighter. But the thing is with Brad Tavares, he's not going to get that here. He hasn't got the luxury of having a fighter that, all he has to do is just weather a bit of a storm and then the experience will show through, because Brad Tavares is more experienced at this level in the UFC than Gerald Meerschaert. And I think that's what's going to carry Brad Tavares through. Like, Brad Tavares is a good striker. I think he's a better striker than Meerschaert. I think Meerschaert might be the better straight grappler. But to be the better straight grappler, he's going to have to get Brad Tavares on his back. Brad Tavares has consistently been known to have like godlike takedown defense. It's so hard to take him down. And if you do take him down, his his get up game is just so good. Just getting right back up to his feet. So for Meerschaert to have a lot of success here, I think he needs to be on top of Tavares, and I just really don't see that happening. I think Meerschaert will struggle to take Tavares down, but if he does get sort of a half takedown maybe, Brad Tavares lands on a knee against the cage, I think you just work back up, break the grip, exit back out into space, and then go again. So I think Meerschaert, and also the other thing here is the gas tank. If Brad Tavares really does start pressuring Meerschaert after Meerschaert is a little bit unsuccessful, taking the fight where he needs to be, which I believe is the mat down on the ground, I think that the pressure that Tavares will put on Meerschaert will slowly start chipping away at Meerschaert's gas tank, whereas Tavares, again, he's a fighter that's been known to just go and go and go. You never really see Tavares gassed, whereas Meerschaert can slow down. So again, that's another thing that I think sits on the side of Tavares. Ultimately, I think this is a fight where Tavares is going to have to do a bit of defensive work, for sure. Like, Meerschaert will look to try and implement a game plan, but I just think Tavares is going to shine through it. So for those reasons, I'm picking Brad Tavares to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Robert Valentin versus the newcomer Torrez Finney. Now, Torrez Finney reminds me a lot of like a small DC, or as some people might say, a Dione win. Like, this is a guy that fights at middleweight, and he's 5'8". Now, admittedly, to be fair to him, he's got quite a long reach for the fact that he's so short in height size. But yeah, look, Torrez is a 5'8" fighter fighting at middleweight. He's just like a little tank. Like I say, it's a small version of DC. Almost like if you accidentally put Daniel Cormier into your tumble dryer on too high of a heat setting, and Torrez Finney will pop out of that. So yeah, look, I really like Torrez Finney though, and Finney's a fighter that has had to do it all in the Contender Series to even get into the UFC. He had a fight on the Contender Series a number of years, 3 years ago, and he won that fight with a second round submission, didn't get signed. Then they brought him back again, and he won a unanimous decision, didn't get signed. So then they brought him back a third time, round 1 KO TKO, and then they sign him. So he finally gets in. He probably should have been signed after the first fight, if I'm being honest. But look, I really like Finney's style. He'll come forward, he'll look to swing and bang, but then it's all just seems to be a means to set up the wrestling to get his takedowns going. In those 3 Contender Series fights, he landed 18 takedowns in total, 7 in the first fight, 10 in the second, and then 1 in the third fight. But just remember that 1 that he landed in the third fight, the fight actually ended in round 1 as well. He just needed the 1 takedown there. So this is a guy that's a beast wrestler, that's got explosive takedowns, that has got a really old school type of ground and pound grappling game where he will look to stack and throw punches. And again, I feel like I reference this more than what I should, but like the old Sean Sherk type of style, and those OGs of this game will absolutely remember Sean Sherk. So I like Torrez Finney. Again, the issue is going to be his height. Like, he's got to close the distance and get into range, and his opponents are going to know that. Now, with Robert Valentin on the other side, he's a fighter that is very big built for the division, 6'2", so he's going to have a huge height advantage over Finney. But again, the funny side about this is Valentin's only going to have a 2-inch reach advantage. So although he's got a massive height advantage, the reach is actually quite similar, but again, the height will negate a lot of that as well. So Valentin is a fighter that does have this all-round style. He's got power within his strike, and especially the short shots like the elbows, and he's got a decent wrestling and grappling game himself. It's just, I feel like in this fight, the wrestling and grappling advantages aren't going to be with him. They're going to be on the side of Finney, and it's going to be up to Valentin to actually defend takedowns here rather than potentially pursue his own and see maybe if he can get Finney tired late in fights. But again, Finney's cardio looks okay. So yeah, I think it's a tough fight for Valentin, because Valentin has got to keep Finney at range. Remember, we're at the apex, so we've got the smaller cage here, so that distance is the lack of distance covered is going to help Finney, because he doesn't have to cover as much distance to close the distance to shoot his takedowns. And I just feel that Valentin, maybe not initially, I think Valentin might have some moments early where he catches Finney a couple of times, and maybe Finney feels a couple of hard punches, but once the takedowns start coming and Valentin starts struggling there, I think the longer the fights go on, Valentin's just going to get hesitant, because he's just going to know that as soon as he throws a big punch at Finney, he's just going to level change and take him down. That's going to set the hesitancy in regards to Valentin's game. And I do think Finney's going to have a successful UFC debut here. Like I say, I really like his style. I really love the old school sort of like wrestling, boxing, and then, stacking style while the fighter's on his back, and you stack against the cage and land ground and pound. Finney, like I say, I like Finney a lot. And I think stylistically here, as long as he just doesn't get caught, because that's the other thing, like, you could easily see Finney level changing into like a big knee from Valentin or something like that. But I do like Finney's entries into the takedowns. He doesn't just shoot for the sake of shooting. He'll time them well, and they're super fast and explosive. So you basically just close that window a little bit, that window of opportunity, just a little bit of an opponent landing like an uppercut or a knee up the middle as you're shooting, when your entries are well timed and when you're fast and explosive into them as well. So yeah, I think Finney's going to do well in this fight, score numerous takedowns, and either potentially get a late finish or a clear decision on the scorecards. I'm picking Torrez Finney to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got newcomer Luis Gurule versus Buday Osbourne. Now, talking about this old school boxing wrestling type of style, I get this sense from Gurule as well. Well, Gurule's got really good grappling to go with it. I kind of like this guy a lot. Like I say, he's got that boxing style on the feet where he will come forwards, he'll land good combinations, but then he's got these explosive takedowns, comes from a wrestling background, and then once he gets fights onto the mat, he's a good scrambler. He can set position, transition well, take the back. He just looks like a fighter that has got it all going for him, and I'm still a little bit reserved on how high his ceiling is in the UFC. Of course, you need to see a fighter a few times in the UFC before you can start making any sort of rankings claims and things like that. But he's definitely a fighter that I'm super impressed with, that is very well rounded and, like I say, can do it all. Now, with Buday Osbourne, I still think Buday Osbourne is a really talented fighter. On the feet striking, super fast, super electric. He does have some power as well. But again, it's the speed, the movement, and the athleticism that Buday Osbourne really thrives in. But then, from a wrestling perspective, he can get taken down. He's not the best offensive wrestler, but then he's got a good grappling game. So I suppose the real hole for Buday Osbourne is within that wrestling, both offensively and defensively, because, once he does get taken down, he's dangerous off his back. He can set arm bars and he can set up triangles. But again, this can be of a detriment to his style and, results of his fights as well, because sometimes he can over-rely on, potentially setting up a submission off his back, and then suddenly the submissions aren't happening, and he's spent 2.5 minutes on his back, and his opponent's now winning the round, and suddenly it's like, right, I've got to get back up to my feet quickly so I can start striking again. So yeah, we with Osbourne, I do think there's a talented fighter in there. But then the other side of Osbourne that I kind of question a little bit is the fight IQ as well. Like, sometimes, I wouldn't even say it's like unforced errors, but sometimes it's just the wrong decision being made, which I can appreciate. Look, when you're fighting at the highest level in the UFC and the adrenaline's flowing and you've got an opponent at the other side of the cage that's trying to put your jaw and your head into row Z, I can understand that sometimes, wrong decisions are made. Like, it comes part and parcel of this sport, especially, like I say, at the highest level where it matters most. But I think with this fight, I just feel that Gurule, from a striking perspective, needs to be very careful, because Buday Osbourne, like I say, is very quick, he's very accurate, he's got good athleticism and speed. So on the feet, Gurule's got to be really careful that he's not just allowing Buday Osbourne in and out, in and out, in and out, because suddenly the fight's going to get away from Gurule. But outside of that, I think Gurule is going to land takedowns in this fight. I think he's going to get Osbourne on his back. I think Osbourne's going to do the same thing. He's going to be throwing up arm bars, throwing up triangles. But I'd be surprised if Gurule got caught by something like that, because first of all, he's going to be a little bit shorter. So that's going to help in regards to not leaving long limbs out there for Osbourne to tie up off his back. And then, like I say, Gurule is, he's a good grappler himself. He's also really well trained. And yeah, I just think that it's going to be one of these fights that's stylistically good for Gurule. Just mind your P's and Q's on the feet. Make sure you're not letting Buday Osbourne, like I say, in and out of range constantly to the point where he starts potentially running away with the fight. Suddenly you've dropped round 1 and now round 2's not going your way, and then round 2's over and you're thinking, well, have I got to play catch up now? But I don't think that's going to happen. I think Gurule will do a good job of striking, but striking into the range to shoot takedowns. And I think, look, it's clear that Gurule, either Gurule or his team, are going to have watched footage and tape on Osbourne, and I think that they're going to see a good path to victory within the takedown, staying safe on top, doing good work, and getting his first UFC win on his UFC debut as well. So, yeah, look, I like Louis Gurule. I think is a fighter that's going to do well, that's got a really good style, and a style that's going to win him fights in the UFC, and I think this could potentially be first of many. So for those reasons, I'm picking Louis Gurule to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Davey Grant versus Daniel Santos. I think this is going to be a really fun, explosive fight, if I'm being honest. Daniel Santos is a fighter that I like a lot. Again, a ton of fun to watch, entertaining, comes forward, will eat 3 punches if it means landing a good combination himself. You've got to love those kind of guys. And of course, fighting out of shooter box as well. Diego Lima with the likes of Charles Oliveira and co. comes out of a really good camp as well. Now, Davey Grant on the other side, I think I feel like he's constantly overlooked. Like in his last fight when he fought Ramon Tavares, I bet Davey Grant is an underdog in that fight. And Davey Grant looked like he should have been a big favourite. And again, it's a similar thing that I said that time as well. Like when I broke that fight down, I feel like if Davey Grant is not fighting someone that is a legitimate top 15 guy or top 20 guy, is a fighter that's going to cause a lot of problems for every other fighter outside of that top 15, that top 20. And Daniel Santos is that fighter outside of that top 15, top 20. Like, he's a good fighter, but I think when it comes to experience and, doing the right things from a veteran perspective to win fights, like, Davey Grant has got that in spades over Daniel Santos. Like, Daniel Santos has had 3 fights in the UFC. He fought Julio Arce and he got totally outclassed in that fight. UFC debut, maybe you can give him a pass. But then he fights John Castaneda, and although he wins that fight, in the first round, Castaneda had Santos in so much trouble, rocking him, dropping him, landing hard on him, to the point where Castaneda, I think, pretty much punched himself out trying to finish a Santos that another referee might have stopped that fight on another night. But, like I say, Castaneda kind of tired himself out punching himself out, trying to get Santos out of there. And then what Santos did in round 2 is put like an insane amount of pressure on Castaneda, who at that point was pretty inexperienced in the UFC as well. So, and what happened is Castaneda, it looked anyway, like he broke inside the cage with the pressure, and then, like I say, the cardio drain from trying to finish Santos, couple those things together, and Santos ended up getting the win. Looked great. Then in the following fight, Santos beats Johnny Munoz very comfortably. Johnny Munoz no longer with the UFC. I think he might have retired as well. So really the best fighter that Daniel Santos has fought was Julio Arce, who, like I say, just absolutely styled on him. And I'm putting Davey Grant in and around that Julio Arce. But if Davey Grant fought Julio Arce, I think Grant probably beats Arce as well. Like, Grant's really, really underrated and overlooked. He's a fighter that, look, when he fought Daniel Marcos, I'm on the side of, I think Daniel Marcos won that fight. I also bet Daniel Marcos as well. But, like, that was an elite striker in the UFC that Davey Grant's going toe-to-toe with, split decision, and you know, a decision a lot of people thought Grant won. Daniel Santos just isn't that level when you're comparing him to like a Daniel Marcos from a striking perspective. Then you look at, well, look, is Daniel Santos going to get takedowns here because that might be his path to victory? Well, he might do, but Grant's not easy to take down, and he's got a good get-up game as well. I just don't know with this fight. Like, Davey Grant's the underdog again, and I just don't know whether I agree with it. I think I would be more, or I'd be less surprised, if Davey Grant was like a slight favourite. So I just think that, look, Daniel Santos is good, but I just don't think he breaks Davey Grant like he broke John Castaneda. But I think Davey Grant can put the same type of clinic on him as what Julio Arce did. So look, it's a good fight. It's definitely a good fight. It's definitely going to be explosive, and it's definitely going to be competitive. But I think Davey Grant edges another fight as an underdog for the second time in a row. So for those reasons, I'm picking Davey Grant to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Dione Barbosa versus Diana Belbita. And Barbosa's a big favourite in this fight, and I kind of understand why. I'll keep it short and simple. Look, Barbosa's a good striker, she's a good wrestler, she's a good grappler as well. Like, at this level in the UFC against opponents like Belbita, I think she's going to be an absolute nightmare. When she starts stepping up in competition, that's when I think it's going to get tough for her, which we saw last time out. Maybe a little bit too much too soon against Miranda Maverick, and Maverick showed the levels in that division because Maverick was just better everywhere. And again, it did show that Barbosa was, maybe too much too soon for Miranda Maverick. And then on the flip side, you've got Diana Belbita's only wins in the UFC have come against Maria Oliveira and Hannah Goldie, who in my opinion aren't UFC caliber fighters. I don't believe either of them are still in the UFC either. And from that, she's lost every other fight. She's lost against Gloria DePaula, who I don't think is in the UFC anymore either. Karolina Kowalkiewicz isn't a bad loss, and neither was her last fight against Molly McCann. But again, McCann's now retired as well, so really the only fighter that she's fought in the UFC that's still in the UFC, I think, is Karolina Kowalkiewicz, and even Kowalkiewicz is at the end of her career. So yeah, look, with Belbita, I think that, she's, I wouldn't even say she's not UFC caliber. I think that she can hang in the UFC. I just think she's going to struggle. But I definitely think Dione Barbosa's the better fighter here, better striker, better wrestler, better grappler, and I think has just got multiple paths to victory, which is the reason why she's also a big favourite. So for those reasons, I'm picking Dione Barbosa to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Rhys McKee versus the newcomer Daniel Frunza. Now, when I first saw this fight and I saw the line and I saw Rhys McKee as the underdog, I thought, well, okay, maybe this is Rhys McKee's spot to get his UFC career back on track against a newcomer that might end up having the debut jitters and not really performing under the brightest lights for the first time, coming from the Contender Series. We see this quite a lot. But when I started to look back into McKee, I was very surprised that he's actually never won a fight in the UFC. He's 0-4 over 2 different stints. Now, I kind of feel that's not very reflective of Rhys McKee as a fighter with his skill set and ability, because I do think he's a good fighter. I think that he's got the skill set to win fights in the UFC. It's just really unfortunate that he hasn't. And to be fair to him, in his last fight against Chidi and Nzechukwu, he went to a split decision, and Nzechukwu is a solidified UFC fighter that gets wins in the UFC. So I kind of feel that, like I say, if you go into a split decision with McKee, then, a split decision with Nzechukwu, then you are UFC caliber. So I do believe that McKee is UFC caliber, but it's just, like I say, I was so surprised to see that he actually hasn't. I thought he'd won a fight in the UFC, but he hasn't. Now, Daniel Frunza on the other side is a fighter that, again, he's tall, he's 6'1", and this is another thing. Like, McKee normally has these height advantages where he's 6'2", and his opponent's like 5'10" or 5'11", but Frunza's going to match him height-wise. McKee's got a little bit of a reach advantage, but Frunza's a fighter that will come forwards, he'll be aggressive, he'll look to throw, and he's also one of those fighters that you can get at him, and that's great, but he's also a fighter that will walk through fire to land back on you, and that's the type of opponent I think that McKee really struggles against, because McKee will land on Frunza and he'll look to do a good job, and he'll hit him with he'll hit him with good strikes, but once Frunza doesn't go anywhere, and McKee's probably giving him his best, Frunza's going to come forward hard and look to land on him, hard low kicks, big punches straight down the middle, and that's where I think McKee's going to get got, because that's happened before. McKee's given his all. He's put everything into getting his opponent hurt or finished and getting him out of there. But then the opponent's still there, not going anywhere, but then comes forward when McKee's just given everything. And it must be demoralising. I think that Frunza's going to do the same thing. I'm not going to be shocked if McKee does win this fight. But like I say, it's hard to put your trust in somebody that has been in the UFC twice, has never won a fight in the UFC, 0-4 in the UFC on those 2 different contracts and those 2 different occasions, and is fighting a fighter that is very similar to some of the previous opponents that McKee's lost against in regards to being able to eat shots and then come forward stronger to break the opponent. It's one of them where I'm putting 2 and 2 together and getting 4. So for those reasons, I'm picking Daniel Frunza to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Victor Henry versus Pedro Falcao. And this is a really interesting fight because when the fight was first announced and we saw the betting lines were quite close, or at least they're rather accurate, shall we say. But the longer it's gone on through fight week and the week before fight week, Victor Henry, money has been coming in on him. The lines widened a little bit, and I kind of get that, and I foresaw it happening. And it's one of these fights where I'm going to be picking one side to win, but think the value is on the other side, if that makes sense. So Victor Henry, I think Victor Henry would have been good at like -150. I think that's a good bet to make. And if you've got Henry around that line, I think you've made a good bet, because I do think that Henry should be favoured. And I think that, from my analysis, from a straight pick and prediction perspective, I do think he wins this fight. But there's things on Falcao's side that I kind of like as well. So with Henry, look, Henry's experienced. He's very good everywhere. He's a good striker. He's got that old school catch wrestling style, which is super old school. And that catch wrestling is under Josh Barnett. And he's got this like 10th planet Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu style as well. So he's got a really fun style of fighting inside the cage. Now on the flip side with Pedro Falcao, he's a little bit underwhelming in regards to what you see from his performances, at least under the UFC banner. But with that being said, he's got a style that I quite like, and it's a style that he'll basically slowly come forward. He'll apply slow pressure with his Muay Thai style of striking, and then bang, it's into the takedown against the cage, and he'll hold you there whilst he's trying to look for opportunities to take you down. And again, from an entertainment perspective, it's not great, but from a stylistic perspective, I think it's a style that's going to win him fights in the UFC. Now, what's interesting is he's a 3rd-degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under Andre Pederneiras, I believe. And Pederneiras is like a 7th degree black and red coral belt in jiu-jitsu, something along those lines. So Pederneiras is as legit as you get. Similar to what I said earlier on with Daniel Gracie and the guys at Renzo Gracie in Philly. Like, when you've got a legitimate when you're a black belt under a legitimate black belt, then you know that it's a legit black belt. But then, like I say, Falcao's a 3rd-degree black belt. So he's definitely got solid grappling and a legitimate grappling game, which is really good. Now, what I like about Falcao is he's actually spent some time at Extreme Couture this fight. He's also spent time at Bones Adams' boxing gym. So what he's trying to do to fix his, well, not fix his game, but to fix some and patch some holes within his style is his striking was always very, I wouldn't say, it was somewhat flat at this level in the UFC. Like, he's a good striker in general, of course he is, but at this level in the UFC, he was very reliant on his grappling. So working with Bones Adams and working his boxing, I think that's an area that he's trying to patch up and fix, which is great. Then he's wrestling. Again, good grappler, but can sometimes struggle to get fights down to the mat. Working at Extreme Couture, one of the best MMA gyms in the world, period. But they also specialise in wrestling as well. Like, look what they did for Francis Ngannou back in the day. So I think that Pedro Falcao, I love what he's done. Is an elite grappler that is now trying to work his wrestling at Extreme Couture, doing boxing with Bones Adams. So he's trying to fix the elements in his game. And I'm telling you, if we see a better version of Falcao here that is a good boxer that can hit takedowns and get the fight down to the mat, then I think he's going to be a nightmare for Henry. It's just, we just don't kind of know that yet until we see it. So for me, look, I like Falcao's style. It's a winning style, what he has. Victor Henry is just an opponent that can match that, where to the point where I think it is going to be competitive, and I do think Henry should have the edges. But like, I'm not going to be surprised if Falcao wins this fight, because he's got like I say, he's got a winnable style, and he's making the right moves to help his development and his progression within his style and his skill set. So I am picking Victor Henry to win, but as the line's widened, I kind of think that Falcao, if you are betting this fight, is the side. But from a straight pick and prediction perspective, I'm picking Victor Henry to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Vanessa Demopoulos versus Talita Alencar. Now, from a betting perspective, again, this line opened quite close, and then money came in on Demopoulos. It pushed Talita Alencar into, plus 110, plus 115, plus 120. But then I've noticed this morning that money's come in on that plus money on Alencar. And you can still get plus money on her as I'm recording the podcast, but it does look like the fight and the line is going into a dead even pick'em, and that might be where it sets. And I'm not surprised that that's happened. I do think it's a very close fight. And the reason being is because of the grappling. Like, from a striking perspective, Alencar lacks a little bit, Demopoulos lacks a little bit, but I think Demopoulos is the slightly better striker. But then when it comes to the wrestling's super close. Maybe give that edge to Demopoulos as well, but it's only a slight edge. However, when it comes to the grappling, I think Alencar is a lot better. And this is where I am leaning on the side of Alencar, because although Demopoulos might have the slight advantages within the striking and within the wrestling, I think the biggest gap in skill in this fight is within the grappling. And the thing is, Demopoulos isn't a bad grappler. She's predominantly best grappling. And this is where the issue comes in, because I just think Alencar is much better in the area where Demopoulos is best. So naturally, you are going to lean over to that side. Are we going to see Vanessa Demopoulos in this fight just look to keep the fight standing and strike with Alencar and not look for takedowns for, I wouldn't say it's never happened before, but, more often than not, Demopoulos will look to get the fight down to the mat if she can. Will she look to just stay standing striking? But then I kind of feel if she does that, it's just going to allow Alencar to come forwards and look for takedowns without the threat of the wrestling coming back on her. So I think stylistically, it slightly favours Alencar, but look, the fight's going to be so close, so competitive. I do think it will rightfully be a dead even pick'em, but from a straight pick and prediction perspective, I'm going to side with where I believe the biggest gap in skill is in a fight that is going to be close. I'm picking Talita Alencar to win this fight. And the final fight to break down on the podcast, we've got Loma Lookboonmee versus Istela Nunes. And I think this is probably one of the easier fights to break down. Lookboonmee is one of the bigger favourites on the card, and I completely understand it. I'd be shocked if she was like -200, -300, and if she was, everyone would just absolutely hammer her, throw her in parlays and all that sort of stuff. Because, look, Loma Lookboonmee's actually developed a game quite well, I think, her MMA game. Like, she's got this Thai background, hundreds of fights experience under her belt, legitimate striker. Coming into the UFC and fighting high-level MMA, you need your wrestling, you need grappling. Now, her offensive wrestling isn't the best, but she's learned wrestling and she's developed a grappling game to the point where, you know, she can compete at this level. And, you know, it's stuff that you love to see. Now, the thing is with Estela Nunes is Nunes isn't that fighter that Lookboonmee has had to deal with in the UFC previously, where, you know, the UFC have matched Lookboonmee up before against a fighter that does want to get the fight down to the mat to see how she hangs. But Estela Nunes is also a predominant striker as well. Now, very similar to what I've just said with Demopoulos and Alencar, except that was from a grappling perspective. You know, when you're looking at the wrestling and grappling, you know, it's going to be close. I actually don't think Estela Nunes has got the edges anywhere in this fight, but I think the fight's going to be won and lost on the feet, unless Nunes starts to look to get takedowns. But I think if Nunes looks to get takedowns in this fight, I think it's going to end up where, you know, the desperation shots and she's hanging and the gas tank is slowly draining, and then Lookboonmee separates back into open space and starts piecing her up again. I just think it's a fight where it's going to be won and lost on the feet striking. And that's where both fighters are predominantly best. But if Nunes does decide that, look, it's not working for a striking, which I don't think it's going to work for a striking, and starts to deviate away from where she's normally best, I just don't think she's going to be successful there. The fighters that are going to be successful against Lookboonmee with wrestling and grappling are fighters that are predominant wrestlers or grapplers, whereas, like I say, Nunes isn't. She's a predominant striker, and I think from a striking fight, I think it's Lookboonmee all day long. Better quality striker, will land better shots, better volume, and if there is the wrestling and grappling mixed in, I actually think Lookboonmee is the better wrestler and grappler anyway. So for all the reasons that I've mentioned, I'm picking Loma Lookboonmee to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. As always, thank you for everybody tuning in and listening. If you are on one of the podcast platforms like Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Music, then please jump over to YouTube as well, where you can leave a comment on the video. We can have a conversation. Tell me who you're betting on. Tell me who you like. Tell me if we disagree. You know, I'm always available to make time every single week to get back to the comments where people want to genuinely, you know, talk good stuff about MMA. So yeah, jump over onto YouTube, and whilst you are on there, if you subscribe to the channel as well, that really helps us out. It's free to do, doesn't cost you anything, and you get a notification in your emails every single week when a podcast is uploaded as well. So please subscribe, please comment, and we will reply. And then very last thing, if you are wanting to jump into the action one more time, then make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. It's really cheap, really affordable, $5 for one event, $10 a month, or $99 for the entire year. As we always say, our ethos is we want you to make your money back from the subscription that you pay with us as quickly as you possibly can, so you can start profiting on top of your bets. We've got something for every type of gambler, including handicapper, betting advice, and AI with Base AI, our UFC prediction software, included within every betting subscription as well. That's all at MMAplay365.com. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. I'll see you again next week.